Been a wild week on Capitol Hill and a lot happening. Well, earlier this week, we were discussing the left's misuse of the legal system, often referred to as lawfare, to target and pursue political opponents. Now, we've seen this with the charges against former President Donald Trump, but it doesn't stop there. It's also been used against advocates, pro-life advocates praying outside of abortion facilities, or concerned parents actually speaking up at school board meetings about what their kids are being indoctrinated with. Anyone who sticks their head up to oppose the left becomes a target. So how can Republicans go on the offense against this? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Congresswoman Harriet Hageman. She is a member of the House Judiciary Committee and the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. She represents Wyoming's at-large congressional district. Congresswoman Hageman, welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So you serve on the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Federal Government, and you're very familiar with how the left is using the legal system. You're an attorney. You have seen the left and how this increasing weaponization of government is being used. What are we going to be able to do to protect the average American from just being able to express themselves?
Well, you're discussing an incredibly important issue. We are seeing it with President Trump. And in fact, when I watch these judges in the cases that are handling the lawsuits and the claims that have been brought against President Trump, it's apparent to me that these judges recognize that the cases are almost frivolous and that they're most likely going to be reversed on appeal. But the purpose of bringing them is to keep him gummed up, to keep him from being able to campaign, to keep him from being able to go out and message to the American people and take his campaign to the American people. So these lawsuits are are being abused and are being brought specifically so that they can prevent Donald Trump from effectively running for president. So as you say, it isn't just against him, it's against parents who are concerned about what's going on in schools. There are several things that we are doing in Congress, and one of them is with the Select Committee on Weaponization. We are exposing the ways in which these agencies have been weaponized against the American people. An example being the Department of Homeland Security. You would think, okay, well, how would that possibly be weaponized against people? They've been giving grants to various universities and NGOs and organizations who are targeting conservative speech and attempting to prevent us from being able to engage in the public square. We have the FBI, who we know has been abusing the FISA process as an example of lawfare, where they're bringing claims in the secret FISA court. They know that they're not valid, but again, it's for purposes of allowing them to be able to investigate people. I do think that we need to be introducing bills and passing bills specifically challenging what these agencies have been doing and prohibiting them from doing it. One of the bills that I have brought is a protection of the First Amendment bill, and what it would do is it would make federal employees who violate someone's First Amendment rights, whether it's their freedom of speech or their freedom of religion, their freedom of association, it would actually make them personally liable to whomever that they have victimized. So that's one of the bills that I've brought. I want to do a civil rights statute that protects our First Amendment rights from federal employees.
Yeah, and I think when someone is falsely targeted and pursued, they should be able to go back and get their attorney fees reimbursed from the entity that is targeting them unjustly.
I agree with that, and that's one of the provisions that we will have in this bill. Keep in mind, we already have what's called the Equal Access to Justice Act, and it was intended to do that. So, for example, I have represented a variety of landowners in the state of Wyoming where the EPA has wrongfully targeted them for allegedly violating the Clean Water Act. I have prevailed in those cases. What's frustrating to me, however, is that judges won't grant people on my side, if you will. It won't grant people that the federal government is targeting. It won't grant them their attorney's fees. But if you have a circumstance where an environmental organization sues the Secretary of the Fish and Wildlife Service, as an example, sues them for failing to list a particular species, judges will readily grant their attorney's fees and costs. It's one of the ways that these federal agencies and the federal judges launder federal money to these various NGOs and these environmental groups. So we have a law on the books. My personal experience is that federal judges will not grant attorney's fees when they disagree with the person who's being persecuted or prosecuted.
Another example of a two-tiered system of
Yes.
of justice. And Congresswoman Hageman, I commend the Republicans for putting this committee together, this subcommittee, because it's a recognition that there is a problem here. You mentioned something a moment ago, and I'm going to be talking with another one of your colleagues here in just a moment, Congressman Adderholt, who's on the Appropriations Committee. When you talked about a grant where money's been given, where the money's being used, that's really the power and the leverage that Republicans have right now, the purse strings. We've got to go after the money.
Well, and we have now passed 7 appropriations bills, and that is part of what we are doing in those appropriations bills. So you're absolutely correct. So, for example, we recently did the Department of Justice. We passed that bill, the appropriations bill for the Department of Justice, and we have cut substantial funding that they are seeking. And so I agree with you. Another area that I just can't figure out why we're not being more aggressive with is, why is the Department of Homeland Security even giving grants that would relate to First Amendment issues? But that's what they've done. What we've discovered is that some of this grant money has gone to radical leftists, people who actually profess to be members of Antifa. This grant money has gone to these universities, and then they're using the money to indoctrinate the next generation of students into this radical ideology. An example is creating a pyramid that would liken the Republican National Committee to Nazi Germany. That's absolute insanity. Yet it is our federal funds that have actually gone to that university for purposes of furthering that agenda and that message. So that was one of the issues that I addressed with Mayorkas when he was before our committee. But you're absolutely right. We have got to start starving these agencies so that they actually focus on the very purpose for which they were created, and not start getting their tentacles into all of these other areas that are just being used to further a leftist agenda.
Right, absolutely right. And again, I commend the subcommittee on weaponization, because you're pulling back the curtain, so the America knows it's there, but they haven't seen these such blatant examples of it. Final question for you, Congresswoman Hageman. You mentioned Mayorkas this week on the House floor, refused to move forward with impeachment. Is that done, or is that going to find life in the committee now?
No, the reason that I believe that died is because this is being investigated through the committee. So we have a very robust investigation going into Mayorkas right now, and I believe that there are 2, if not 3, reports that have already been issued that identified the various ways in which he has engaged in a dereliction of duty. But there has to be a process that we follow for the very reasons of what we're talking about. We know that the mainstream media is largely in the camp of the Democrats. And so in order to be able to convince the American public, we have to go to the American public, and we have to find the mechanism to do that. Just simply doing an impeachment without presenting all of that evidence allows the mainstream media to continue to cover up the terrible things that Mayorkas and his boss have been doing, both in relation to the border as well as the First Amendment violations, as I described a few moments ago. So we need to continue with the investigation. I believe that there will be a final report issued, and at that point, I believe that the committees, including the Judiciary Committee, will be involved in a formal impeachment process. But we need to go through the steps in order to do that, because our audience, our jury, is the American public. And if we don't present that case, the mainstream media is going to try to destroy us.
So in other words, stay tuned, more to come on this issue. Right. Congresswoman Hageman, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us.
Have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you soon.